Hello everyone, in today's video I thought we'd be using this one as a way to respond to a question somebody had asked me on a recent live stream. They were saying, is it worthwhile to put your flaps up if you lose your engine during an approach? I answered the question saying, well, if you bring your flaps up, you're going to get a sinking feeling, you're going to put more drag, it's going to take forever. So I immediately said, well, I don't really like that answer. So I immediately got to work because I have a flight sim, and one of the things you do with your pilot license is it becomes a license to learn. And I wanted to experiment with this a little bit. What I had been taught is basically don't touch your flaps in the event that you do have an engine out, and simply pick a place to land. So I wanted to experiment with this a little bit, and I decided to take out the Cessna 182 for the purpose of this. Now we're up here. This is at Westfield. This is a really, really nice little tower. It's called Barnes Air Force Base for those who like to replicate the experiment. The weather is set to basically high clouds. Again, nothing too sophisticated here. And we're going to be landing on this big old honking runway right here. And like I said, this one's nice for us because if we land short of the runway, there's a ton of beautiful grass that we can utilize for the purposes of, having that sort of experiment. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to fly the aircraft two different ways here. The first method we're going to use is we're going to have our flaps deployed properly, and then we're going to have an engine out the moment I turn base to final. What I'm going to do then is I'm immediately going to go, oh no, my engine, and I'm going to retract the flaps and see what happens. Then we'll come around again for another landing, and then we'll try it again and see what happens if we don't retract the flaps. Now, it should be interesting because, like I said, conventional wisdom says don't touch your flaps because obviously, you got to concentrate on landing. And the reality is, if you have to reach for your flaps back up, you're probably not going to make the landing anyway. So kind of keep that in the back of your head a little bit when you do think about these kinds of things. In the real world, if I had an engine out during that sequence, it wouldn't be time. You'd have to push the nose over immediately, get yourself immediately to your glide speed, and then you'd have to pick a place to land. Like, that's basically how I'd been trained, and that's basically kind of how I would approach that normally. But like I said, for the purposes of experimentation, we're going to experiment just a little bit here. And like I said, we'll try to replicate the experiment fairly accurately so that we can go ahead and decide what seems like it's going to work here. So I'm going to line myself up here. That's our downwind there. It's a pretty good sized runway. And what I will do is I'm just going to pause this in the air right before we turn off the final here, and pause right here. And I just want to look out on the ground real fast, just kind of study. There seems to be this little field right here and everything like that. Our current altitude says we're actually a bit high, which is fine. Like I said, we've got plenty of grass to land on when the engine dies on us. And we're going to do this first by not deploying, by not retracting the flaps and see what happens. So what I am going to do, though, is I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I can cheat here a little bit and get myself back up to my correct speed. There we go. Let's go ahead and turn final. Again, we're going to try to use that spot on the ground both times so that when we do this, we have a fairly consistent experiment. That was about 600 feet. All right, and pause. Let's go ahead and brake the plane. Beautiful. All right, engine's out. So I'm not going to touch my flaps. The first thing they would teach us to do is to immediately pitch for speed for a glide, which is about 65. So I'm going to hold the nose about as close to 65 as I can, which is going to put us down on the ground right there. And we're going to go ahead and pull back. It's a 182. Oh, that would have been death. At the very least, I would have thunk, ow. So you can see that didn't go very well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get the engine started back up again. Like I said, unfortunately, we survived that. I don't think we would have. I really needed to get that nose down sooner. And also, it's a 182, and my nose is tremendously heavy. So what I will do now is I'll get ourselves back up in the air. We'll set up the exact same experiment. And this time what we'll do is we'll go ahead and try to do it where we bring our flaps up and see if it makes any difference. Whoa. Got a little extra altitude here. It's only 1,200 feet. This is how what we're supposed to be. Let's go ahead and get this plane nice and dirty. Dirty airplane. All right. Let's put those flaps down. Pretend we're on approach. Go ahead and grab our handy-dandy slew command. If you remember, we were right about here. We're also right about 600 feet. Like I said, we're just going to try to recreate it as accurately as we can here. Looks pretty good. I think we're a little high. What's that? That's 760. Yeah, a little high. So let's go ahead and lose another 100 feet or so. Let's call it right there. All right, so let's get down to 65 knots, and we're going to recreate the experiment. But this time what we're going to do is we're going to intentionally retract the flaps. So my flaps are down. I'm at 65 knots. I'm turning my final. Turning my final. Go ahead and pause right here. Let's go ahead and do the same thing we did last time. We're going to, let's get back up to that final speed first. We lost a little bit in that corner. And that's it. Engine out. So first things first, our engine is out. We're going to retract the flaps as fast as possible. Oh boy. All right. Ooh. I think I hit something. So in that particular case, what had happened is, yes, I got a little tiny low by the time I got the flaps down. My speed was a little slower. That loss of lift at the last second when I needed to grab the ground killed me. I died. There was nothing I could do because even though my speed was looking like it was going to be okay, I couldn't get the nose back up because all that lift that those flaps were providing just went away all at once, and no amount of inertia would have saved me from that one. So I know what you're thinking. You're saying, well, what if you have a different kind of airplane? Well, we'll test that theory. So I figured let's go ahead and get something a little bit lighter and not constant speed for this particular experiment. So I've grabbed onto the Warrior 2, an aircraft that I've got a little bit of experience with pretending the engine doesn't work on it. Now, the reason why we're going to go with this particular plane is because the flaps are different than that on a 172. You actually look down, it is this gigantic handlebar, kind of like a handbrake in a car, and it allows us to retract and unretract the flaps very, 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 very quickly, which now enables us to be able to go to replicate the experiment with not having a delay in that extra bit of lift. So let's go ahead and try this out. So we're going to go ahead and now pop in 2 notches of flaps right away. Give everybody a little wiggle, make sure our controls are nice and smooth. This plane is way more responsive than this has been modeled here. Kind of annoying. All right, so we're going to get it to a speed. I always use 70 knots when I used to fly this thing. It was just, straightforward. It was a good speed. Like, you still had a good amount of control. The nose was nice and flat when you landed. I know you're supposed to be landing at like 65, but sometimes you do what you got to do. All right, we're turning on to base. Oh, come on. Oh, man, this plane is this plane. It is a very, very good plane. But, man, it can be a little bit of a project sometime to get it to do what you want it to do. All right, so there is our objective. Let's go ahead and turn to final here. Speed 70. Like I said, we're doing just fine here. Oh, my gosh. Okay, let's go ahead and the power's out. And now we're going to do our first version of the landing. So our landing gear all the way. I'm immediately going to pitch for my best glide here, which is going to be about 65 knots. Get it to about 65. I'm going to push the nose down. I'm going to just hold 65 knots just like I've gotten beaten to me many, many times. This one, we are leaving the flaps full. We're not doing anything special. All I'm going to do is concentrate on landing the plane. And we're going to end up in the grass here, but that's okay. Hey, if anything, I might be able to keep us in ground effect long enough to get to the runway. Oh, I almost made it. Lame. Okay, so we can see by leaving the flaps in that case, because we were a lighter non-constant speed propeller, we actually were able to make it all the way down to the ground. And if we had gotten a little luckier, we might have actually been able to get all the way down to the runway too, which is pretty impressive. It also gives you an idea of the differences between those two aircraft as far as gliding capabilities goes. So let's go ahead and replicate our experiment. There we go. We're a little high, but that's okay. Couple clicks of flaps. Tons and tons and tons of up trim here. All the up trim. Give me some up trim. Thank you. So what we're going to do this time is we're going to slap the flaps up. Now remember, this plane has very, 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 very quick retracting flaps. Ooh, go ahead and get the plane as close to 70 as I can get it. I'm just looking at my window here. This is a great airport, by the way, and they have an amazing sushi place if you're an FBO eater kind of a thing. So if you don't mind paying $500 for sushi, this is not a bad spot to go. Oh my gosh, I need full throttle in this base turn to keep this thing tolerable. There's my altitude, looking pretty good, Oh! Oh man, this thing can be a little bit much sometimes. There we go, there's our final. We want to be doing about 70, and my engine just died. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to immediately put our flaps up all the way, and we're going to immediately pitch for 70. Keep in mind, our speed here is going to be slightly higher. Take out my 70 knots. I'm being very careful. I'm being very, very, very careful. Ooh, nope. Try to keep it as close to that 70. Remember, we have no additional lift now. All right, we're going to get that flare on. We're going to get into ground effect. And we're going to safely put the plane on the ground. Now, that is interesting. So what can we decide here? Well, the reality is that we have two totally different aircraft here. The reality is this particular plane does not have large flaps. If you actually look at them on the side, if I pop them all the way down, you can see that these little tiny things, the flaps on the 182 on the flip side were gigantic. So they had a greater contribution to the amount of lift that we had during our particular approach there. But the big thing that you can probably see there is when we retracted our flaps very, very quickly at the moment of the incident, we were actually able to get our plane all the way safely down to the ground and execute, about as normal as a landing as you want to call that. When we left the flaps down, you'll notice that we did not make it to the runway because all that extra drag basically canceled it out. So again, imagine if we had motorized flaps on this thing as opposed to having conventional flaps, the types that, I'm sorry, the one that we had the handle on. I would not have been able to bring those flaps up as quickly. So at the time of the incident, I would have had to wait the full 7 to 9 seconds for them to retract. 7 to 9 seconds, when you only have 25 seconds total time, would not have been enough time to get myself safely down to the ground. So you can see exactly the kind of incident that probably would have created. You can also see from the 182 that by retracting the flaps, I was in trouble. Another major thing you have to think about too is in this aircraft, we have a fixed pitch propeller. On the 182, we have a constant speed propeller, which means when we have an engine failure, this aircraft's propeller is not going to be pushing back nearly as hard as it is going to be on the 182. So when you combine the fact that the flaps are different, plus you combine the fact that you have the constant speed propeller, then that would go ahead and prove that point. So now to test this, let's get another aircraft with a constant speed propeller to see if the theory is correct. All right, now it's going to get a little more interesting. The reason I say this is more interesting is we now have another variable here. Actually, move those flaps away, we don't need them anymore. And that's the fact that not only are we a much bigger and heavier single-engine plane, we also have retractable landing gear. So theoretically, we should be able to retract our landing gear so quickly that the aircraft will still be able to execute a safe landing. Now, in the back of my head, I'm working those numbers going, you know what I mean? It's just kind of one of those where it's like, man, those numbers don't sound good to me. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep it kind of conventional here. And we're just going to go ahead and fly that same approach that we've flown a couple times already today. And we're going to go ahead and see what happens. So this time what we're going to do is we're going to leave the plane as dirty as possible. By the way, this is a coffin corner, and I'm already feeling the plane threaten to coffin me. Stop it. There we go. Much better. Oof, duh. Yeah, that is just a little bit more drag than I would expect in this plane. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and recreate the experiment. Again, this is a little different. And we're going to go ahead and kill the power. And that's it. Aircraft is down. So we immediately want to establish our glide, which is going to be about 75 in this plane. Coming down, let the nose come down a little bit. Nose down, keep the speed up. Let's arrest the descent rate. Oh, sorry, wheels. Does this mean we're not going to get sushi? Oh, yeah, that was a little short. That's okay, though, because that probably would have been survival in that field. It would have been the world's bumpy, basically the opposite of what a short field landing is supposed to be, but that's okay. So we're going to recreate the exact same experiment, but this time we're going to stack the deck a little bit. So what I'm going to do is, first I want to enter into a flat spin. Let's deal with that first. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the landing gear and get rid of them. So we're going to make the plane as clean as possible in order to try to facilitate that last little bit of landing there to see if we can make it actually work. Now, one of the things I will do is when we're done with this one is I'll pull up what they actually recommend. By actually, I mean the good folks at, PHAK who do all that literature for like preparations of pilots and stuff like that. They have an official recommendation. Like I said, I'll get to it in a second, and I also kind of have my opinions. Now, obviously, if this were a jet, it'd probably be a little bit different. So I'm actually going to keep my airspeed up a little bit quicker in this corner, so it's just a little bit safer of a corner to take here. Yeah, we're slightly off here, but that's okay. Alright, we want to validate our experiment a little bit, though. There we go. Put the last click of flaps in. Gears down. Let's go ahead and take that turn to landing. Oop, a little bit wider. Fix that. Alright. There we go. Pop, 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 pop. All fixed. And my engine died. Alright, let's clean the plane up as fast as possible. Landing gears up. Flaps coming up. Now this is interesting, because now I don't have landing gear. Landing gear down. No, 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 no! That was bad. That would have been very bad. I think the first landing actually would have been safer. So we can see with the two higher performance airplanes that yes, indeed, if we do have ourselves our situation like that, we really should not do that. It's one of those kind of things because in that particular situation, we weren't going to make it. So obviously, what do we do? So what's the correct answer? We've seen a little bit of both today. What is the thing that they actually recommend? And believe it or not, the good people who make the PHAK, that's the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. You can actually look that up. It's completely free. What they do is they actually have a thing on here, and I'll go ahead and call it up directly on the screen so you can see it here. Let me go ahead and switch modes. There you go. It says right here, never retract the flaps to correct for undershooting, since that suddenly decreases the lift and causes the airplane to be sinking rapidly. It also says that the airplane must be retrimmed for final approach to compensate for the change of aerodynamic. With all this, you're going to end up with a situation with a significant nose-down tendency, which is tremendously dangerous. And obviously, it's going to be very, very, very difficult to do. So in this particular case, they recommend not touching the flaps and simply finding a nice, safe place to land. Obviously, the more powerful the propeller is, the less likely you are to be able to safely execute the maneuver. But you noticed with our, especially two high-performance planes, that we were able to make it much safer as soon as we just flew the plane basically down to the ground softly. Now, I know the last question you're probably asking here is, well, this has been a great experiment. What do you recommend? One of the things I learned when I was in my flight training, especially with the high-performance plane, is when you are coming onto final, never put yourself in a position where if you lost the engine, you'd crash. Now, you're sitting there going, how's that avoidable? Well, let me go ahead and show you real fast. Let's go ahead and get ourselves all reset right here. That looks pretty good. All right, let me show you what I mean. So let's go ahead and do my regular approach here. I'm going to go ahead and put one click of flaps in. Now, conventional wisdom says go ahead and take that turn once you get to the 45-degree angle. Now, if you lost your engine now, do you think you can make it? How about now? How about now? How about now? See what I mean? So I'm actually going to take this turn a little early. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold it. By the way, my power is at 0 right now, in case you were curious. I'm not going to put the flaps down until I know I can land the plane. And just like that. Yes, that was an awful approach, an absolutely messy. But notice my flaps never came down until I was completely confident that the plane could get on the runway. The downside to that philosophy, of course, is now you're making the approach less stable during your approach. Some of you will say, why don't we use a little less flaps? That's completely up to you if you want to use a little less flaps. The most important thing is the feds say you're supposed to be using full flaps for landing unless there's some environmental condition that precludes it. The other thing you got to remember too is at the end of the day, if you're going to be in a situation where you're going to be losing an engine on that, you're not going to have time to be fitzing with flap handles and thinking things through. You're going to have to execute whatever it's going to take to get you under the ground at that moment. Trying to pull yourself out and make it to the end of that runway, you can end up spinning, you're going to end up crashing the plane. So hopefully this video was helpful. Like I said, I learned a little bit from it. My final advice, leave the flaps down, execute whatever emergency landing you need to land. If you want to get fancy, make sure you're never in a position where you need to worry about this. Make sure you stay close to the runway during your traffic patterns. Make sure that you have some kind of plan. Don't put that last super draggy thing of flaps in until you absolutely know you're going to get to the runway. But other than that, enjoy.